World leaders arrive in London ahead of the Queen's state funeral as members of the public are advised the queue to see her lying in state will soon be closed. The US President Joe Biden has, in the last few minutes, paid his respects to the Queen in Westminster Hall. And this is the scene outside Westminster Hall as members of the public wait patiently for hours to be allowed in. Among the 2,000 guests at tomorrow's funeral at Westminster Abbey are members of the public who've been preparing for the solemn occasion.
Fairly choked up. Emotional is probably the main word, yeah. Honoured and emotional.
I'm here on the Mall where people are preparing to camp overnight ahead of the funeral.
Also on the programme. In Ukraine, President Zelensky says he has more evidence of torture carried out by Russian forces in the east of the country. And a huge typhoon strikes southern Japan. Around 3 million people are told to evacuate their homes. Good afternoon. Ahead of the Queen's state funeral tomorrow, people are being advised not to join the queue to see her lying in state, as it'll shortly reach its final capacity. Those who were already in line will be admitted into Westminster Hall until just before 6:30 a.m. tomorrow. This evening, there'll be a 1-minute silence at 8 p.m. across the UK to remember the late Queen. During the day, King Charles greeted foreign dignitaries and world leaders arriving for Her Majesty's state funeral, which will be held at Westminster Abbey tomorrow morning. He also held an audience with the Prime Minister, Liz Truss. The new King is holding a diplomatic reception at Buckingham Palace for them this evening. Here's our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell.
The final preparations for tomorrow's state funeral. At Buckingham Palace, the King arrived with a wave to the crowds. Many have been drawn to the palace, as they have been since the first news of the Queen's death 10 days ago. There's a desire shared by many thousands to be a part of this moment, placing flowers in the designated spaces, or simply absorbing the sights and the emotions along the route of the funeral procession and in the places where world leaders will gather.
We didn't know what exactly to do, but we wanted to do something. You know, it felt right to come up and do something and bring my son here. And, you know, I think there's a lot of people that don't know what to do but feel like they need to do something. So it just felt like the right thing to do was to come up here with everybody else.
From Camilla, the Queen Consort, a personal reflection recorded for a BBC documentary on the 70 years of the Queen's reign.
She has been part of our lives forever. I'm 75 now, and I can't remember anybody except the Queen being there. It must have been so difficult for her being a solitary woman. There weren't women prime ministers or women presidents. She was the only one, so I think she carved her own role. I'll always remember that smile. You know, that smile is unforgettable.
The former Archbishop of York recalled a letter he'd received from the Queen about grief.
The Queen wrote me a most wonderful letter 4 weeks after the burial of Prince Philip, thanking me for the flowers, the prayers, and then ended by saying, when you are grieving someone you deeply love, it isn't easy when you're having to do it in public. So my thought will be to the new King and the whole royal family. They are grieving publicly, and they will find a space to do it.
There is little such space at the moment. The King had an audience with the UK Prime Minister. And then other political leaders who'll be attending the state funeral started arriving at Buckingham Palace for a state reception there this evening, to be hosted by the King and other members of the royal family. One of the visiting heads of state is the US President Joe Biden. A short time ago, he and the First Lady visited the Palace of Westminster to pay their respects to the late Queen on behalf of the American people. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
Well, in the last few minutes, the US President Joe Biden has been to Westminster Hall to pay his respects to the Queen. He appeared on the balcony overlooking Queen Elizabeth's coffin with his wife, Dr. Jill Biden. Well, he will be among around 2,000 other guests, including around 500 heads of state and foreign dignitaries who will be attending the Queen's state funeral tomorrow. It'll be one of the biggest gatherings of royalty and politicians hosted in the UK for decades. Many others have also been paying their respects to the late Queen and signing the Book of Condolence all afternoon, as our diplomatic correspondent James Landale reports.
The Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, Your Majesty.
The funeral may be tomorrow, but the diplomacy is already underway. Today, the King met the leaders of the 14 countries where he remains head of state.
The Prime Minister of Tuvalu, Your Majesty.
Just some of the hundreds of foreign dignitaries arriving in London this weekend. Many stopped off here at Lancaster House to sign a book of condolence, a steady flow of the global great and sometimes good, paying their respects on behalf of themselves and their countries.
Agus Siacon Shirita Anam Log. I so wish eternal peace to her wonderful, generous spirit and, of course, every good wish to King Charles III.
And we appreciated very much her leadership of the Commonwealth, which saw a dramatic transformation from a nation of 8 countries when she went onto the throne to 56 at the time of her death.
Thank you, Your Majesty. Thank you for your dedication. The people of Fiji will never forget you. Modimanda Pakalilai.
Many also came to see the lying in state, not queuing, of course, but joining the public to stand in silence and perhaps some awe before the coffin of a woman whose reign will outlast them all. And then at Buckingham Palace, they'll attend a state reception hosted by the King and Queen Consort. This afternoon, ministers were already queuing at the gates for one of the largest gatherings of world statesmen for decades. Such are the numbers of global leaders that many will gather here at the Royal Hospital Chelsea tomorrow morning to take a bus to Westminster Abbey, a kind of secure car share that has discomforted some, but not all.
I don't think the bus warrants too much fuss. When we came here for CHOGM, we used buses for transport. Back in New Zealand, I often get our ministers to carpool in a van. So, look, this just makes good sense.
Of course, the one man who won't take the bus is President Biden, who arrived late last night. He'll travel in his own secure car as always. One man who officials say won't be coming to the funeral is Saudi Arabia's de facto ruler, Mohammed bin Salman, who's been accused of involvement in the murder of a journalist, accusations he's denied. Today, several leaders, including Justin Trudeau, Canada's Prime Minister, also dropped by Downing Street for what officials said were informal conversations with Liz Truss. Earlier, he'd paid his own tribute to the Queen.
I first met Her Majesty when I was 7 years old, and her presence throughout my life had been constant, inspiring, and graceful. As Prime Minister, I benefited from her counsel, her thoughtfulness, her curiosity, her sense of humour.
Tomorrow, the diplomacy will be put on hold as the leaders arrive at Westminster Abbey and the focus returns to the monarch they've come to mourn. James Landale, BBC News.
Let's join our correspondent Jonathan Blake, who's been following events inside Westminster Hall as both members of the public and dignitaries have been paying their respects. Jonathan.
Rita, as the early evening sunlight shines through the windows of this ancient hall, the rhythm of this extraordinary scene continues as it has done, largely unbroken for several days. A slow but steady stream of people coming down the steps into Westminster Hall, taking in the sight of the Queen's coffin, resting on the catafalque, then marking in their own way the moment they file past, pausing to pay their respects. Today, dignitaries and world leaders have entered the hall, standing on a platform mostly unnoticed by the mourners below, still in quiet reflection. The First Lady of Ukraine, Elena Zelenska, among those coming to pay their respects in this ancient space. The atmosphere is solemn, hushed, respectful. Every 20 minutes, a change in the guard. Even A few moments ago, the President of the United States, Joe Biden, and First Lady Dr. Jill Biden seemed not to distract anyone's attention inside the hall. The sole focus here remains the Queen's coffin, draped in the Royal Standard. The people filing through now know they will be among the last to see this spectacle as the Queen's lying in state enters its final hours.
Jonathan, thank you. Jonathan Blake reporting there from Westminster Hall. Well, as we've been hearing, people are being asked not to set off to join the queue to pay their respects to the Queen. The queue will be closed at some point today before the lying in state period ends at 6:30 tomorrow morning. Hundreds of thousands of people have already visited Westminster Hall. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning reports.
Where there was despair, it brought hope. Where there was sadness, it brought joy. The queue itself was a journey, not just in the steps people took. The lines will close this evening, the end of a perfect tribute. The last few running to make sure they were in it.
Remember, it's a marathon, not a sprint today.
I'm Jo. I've just joined the queue at 15:22, come from Bournemouth. We queued on Friday night, and then my daughter was crying her eyes out, her back, her feet, her knees. So we left the queue 6 o'clock yesterday morning, and we just thought we've got to give it another shot. Luckily, I'm flustered because we wanted to get here before the queue closed, and we've made it. Thank you.
For those nearer the front, it was also a challenging night.
I'm Emma. This is Esme. We're from Cornwall. We've been queuing about 11 hours.
My legs have been hurting.
It's been pretty hard. It's cold. We stopped for quite a long time.
Yeah.
We were going to give up, but we carried on. We got each other through it, didn't we?
So why didn't you give up, Esme?
Because the Queen would have wanted us to be resilient in ourselves and push ourselves to be the best we can.
You feel quite emotional about the whole journey you've done?
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons for coming. People we've lost, and seeing so many people here all united. We lost my gran during COVID, so didn't get the chance to say goodbye.
Emma kept turning back for a last look. Was it worth the very hard night?
Yeah, I think it was. It's just our final chance to pay our respects.
It meant a lot to you to be able to do that?
Yeah, I would be telling the people that aren't here anymore all about it. But it makes me closer to them.
We're Lucy and Jamie. We've been queuing for 12 hours and this is my second time doing this.
She came first with her parents, returning today with her husband.
So the question is, why do it again?
That 5 minutes was so special and it's almost not enough time to take it all in that I thought, well, you know, I'll go through it again. It'll be worth it. For me, it's kind of restored my faith in humanity quite a bit because you just see all of these people who are coming together. You may come from different backgrounds, but we've all just got one thing in common today.
There was this something in the air in there that was just magnificent.
This queue is a phenomenon. It has helped sustain the royal family and given the nation a focus for its grief. The British people, just by turning up, by being here, have turned part of the national mourning into a celebration of the Queen's life.
Millions of steps. Hundreds and thousands of people. All for one Queen. Lucy Manning, BBC News.
Well, our correspondent Chichi Uzundu is where people have been joining the queue in Southwark Park. And Chichi, that capacity has now nearly been reached.
Indeed, well, where there once was a river of people flowing through this park, it's barely a trickle. I know there's a group behind me, but very few people are now joining the end of the queue. In fact, I've got Zachary, Mum No Leg and Joe who just made it on time, because Zach, you didn't think that you were going to make it.
No, it's crazy. We just left an hour ago. We didn't even think that we would get here. We didn't even think that we'd get in the queue. We thought, oh, we'll try. Maybe we'll go to Green Park or Hyde Park, somewhere just in London instead, but we made it and we're one of the last people to get through, so it's great.
And how excited are you to join this? Because the Department of Culture, Media and Sport are now saying it's going to take you about 9.5 hours.
It's a long time, but if you look at it a different way, it's only 5 miles, so It'll take a long time, but it's definitely worth it because it's history. You know, it'll never happen again. It's yeah, it'll definitely be worth it, and it'll be great.
And who wanted to go more, you or Mum?
I think Mum wanted to go more, and she was really disappointed because she heard, oh, the queue will close later today. I thought, why don't we just leave and have a go? And we made it, so it was really good.
Well, congratulations. Yes, so the queue is starting to dwindle down to a trickle of people.
Chi-Chi, thank you. And if you can't get to London, but you want to pay your respects, the BBC is offering a continuous 24-hour view of the Queen's lying in state. That service is available on the BBC homepage, the BBC News website and app, the iPlayer, on BBC Parliament and also the Red Button. To other news now, and Ukraine's President Zelensky says that investigations into possible Russian war crimes are continuing in the city of Izium, which was recently retaken from Russian forces. Bodies are being exhumed from a mass burial site on the edge of the city. Izium is one of several areas back in Ukrainian hands after significant territorial gains in recent days, although heavy fighting is still continuing. Our Ukraine correspondent James Waterhouse is in Kiev for us now. James.
Rita, it seems Ukraine is just as focused on documenting as it is defending. President Zelensky today claiming that investigators have found new evidence of 10 torture chambers around the city of Izium used by the Russians during their occupation. There are two, once again, reports of fighting, with one official in the Kharkiv region saying that 4 health workers were killed in a shelling as they tried to evacuate patients. I think we can see such claims continuing over the coming days, weeks and months. But the question over how Russia will respond to recent Ukrainian successes is only going to get louder. The Ministry of Defence in the UK is reporting that Russia is looking to expand the number of civilian targets it wants to target with long-range missile strikes. This past week we've seen a dam and major electricity substations targeted. But look, throughout this war, Russia has always used long-range weapons to strike across Ukraine, to undermine Ukrainian morale. And as things stand, very much the opposite is happening.
James, thank you. James Waterhouse there. Police and community leaders in Leicester have called for calm after street clashes in the east of the city last night. 2 people were arrested after officers had to separate hundreds of mainly young men in 2 groups from Hindu and Muslim communities. It's the latest in a series of disturbances initially sparked by a cricket match between India and Pakistan late last month. A 24-year-old man has been charged in connection with the stabbing of 2 police officers in central London on Friday. Mohammed Rahman is accused of attempted murder and causing grievous bodily harm with intent. One of the officers suffered what have been described as life-changing injuries. Another suffered neck wounds but is expected to recover fully. 3 million people in Japan have been urged to leave their homes as the country prepares for one of the most destructive typhoons in years. Winds of more than 90 miles per hour have been battering the southern coast, and at least 25,000 properties are already without power. Our Tokyo correspondent Rupert Wingfield-Hayes reports.
So far, the more dire predictions about Typhoon Nanmadol have not come to pass. Despite winds gusting to nearly 150 miles an hour, only minor damage is being reported from western Japan. But this is a huge storm, one of the biggest to hit Japan in half a century, and it is far from over. As it swept ashore this morning in southern Kyushu, the government issued an emergency alert, one which has never been declared before for anywhere on the Japanese mainland.
There's a chance we'll see winds of a kind that we haven't experienced before. We could also get big swells, storm surges and record rain.
The destructive winds from Nanmadol are only part of the threat. It is also carrying vast quantities of water, and that is now falling right across the eastern half of Kyushu. As much as half a metre of rain could fall in less than 24 hours. Kyushu is very mountainous, and the danger will then be of landslides and even more so of flooding, There is now just too much water coming down for the rivers to handle. And so the Japanese government has told nearly 3 million people they need to leave their homes and head to local evacuation centres. This morning, thousands began to heed that advice, but hundreds of thousands more will likely choose to ignore that advice and ride out the storm at home. It is going to be a very tense night for them and for the authorities. River levels across Kyushu and southern Honshu are expected to peak sometime in the next 12 hours, putting Japan's extensive flood defences under severe strain. All it will take is one breach and whole towns can be inundated in minutes, giving those who've refused to evacuate no time to escape. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News in Tokyo.
Let's go back now to look at the events of the next 24 hours. After days of lying in state, the coffin of the late Queen will begin its final journey tomorrow morning as part of a grand state funeral. At 10:44, it'll be moved from Westminster Hall to Westminster Abbey, a short distance away, where the funeral service will be held. The Royal Navy's state gun carriage, seen here rehearsing, will bear the coffin, drawn by 142 sailors. Senior members of the royal family, including the King and his sons Prince William and Prince Harry, will walk just behind in the procession. At 11 o'clock, the Queen's funeral will begin in Westminster Abbey. It's thought 2,000 guests will attend. Towards the end of the funeral service, the last post, a short bugle call, will be played, followed by a 2-minute national silence. The service will be broadcast on BBC TV, on radio and on bbc.co.uk. It'll also be shown on big screens in public parks and venues across the UK, and around 125 cinemas will also screen the event. After the funeral ceremony, the Queen's coffin will be taken in a procession to Wellington Arch at Hyde Park Corner. The procession will be led by members of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and the route will be lined by members of the armed forces. The King will lead members of the royal family walking in the procession. The coffin will then be taken by state hearse to Windsor. At 4 p.m, there'll be a committal service in St George's Chapel in Windsor Castle with a small congregation, including the royal family, and this service will also be televised. Here's our Midlands correspondent Navtej Johal now, who spent the day with two people who've been invited to attend the funeral.
As a volunteer emergency responder, Barbara is prepared for anything. She's so good at the job that she was informed that she was being awarded an MBE a few months ago. But she wasn't prepared for the call she received on Saturday last week.
Hello, is that Mrs. Barbara Ann Crellin? You tell me who you are, because it's no caller ID, and I'll tell you if I am. So, Cabinet Office. And then the next thing was, we'd like to invite you to the Queen's funeral. And I sort of filled up and I said, sorry, we'd like to invite you to the Queen's funeral. And I said, why me? I just didn't know what to think, what to say. I cried. I went and found my husband. I took him outside and I cried again. And he said, can I come? I said, no, there's no plus ones.
The retired head teacher has spent more than a decade responding to 999 calls for the ambulance service as part of Rutland First Responders, a volunteer group trained to give life-saving treatment to their community.
How will you feel tomorrow when you're at the state funeral in London?
I should imagine fairly choked up. Emotional is probably the main word, yeah. Honoured and emotional.
Westminster Abbey, the state funeral of Queen Elizabeth II.
Much like Barbara, Kevin's life is focused on volunteering too. He organised thousands of people to give up their time to help others during the pandemic. He had no idea that he would end up being invited to the Queen's funeral.
A call on the landline, which of course you only get calls when someone's trying to scam you on the landline, but it was the Cabinet Office and just saying, oh, would you like to come to the Queen's funeral? And it just came completely out of the blue, very much like the honour came, and I was completely floored by it.
The volunteers that Kevin worked with did everything from delivering essential supplies to vulnerable people in his home city of Leicester to supporting the vaccination effort. He says he can't believe his work has now been recognised with an invitation to the funeral.
I don't think I can get over the fact that it's such an honour to be there representing the general British public, to be there to witness the funeral, and just to be part of it is just out of this world.
Barbara and Kevin are among around 200 people from the Queen's birthday honours list who have received an invitation. Members of the public who will bear witness to an historic event. Naftej Johal, BBC News.
The final route for the procession for the Queen's coffin will be down the Mall before continuing on to Windsor. Mourners and well-wishers hoping to get a prime position have been camping out there since Friday when the route was announced. Our correspondent Ashley John Baptiste has spent the day on the Mall and he joins me there now from there. Ashley.
Hi, yes, well, already people are gathering and you can probably see behind me many also preparing to stay overnight ready for the Queen's state funeral, and people here have come from all walks of life. To give you a sense of the atmosphere here, we have Judith, Carol and Sarah from Leicestershire and Robbie, who has flown from Toronto, Canada. So first of all, for you three, tell me what it means to be here today.
Right, well, it's the end of an era. Our lovely Queen has been on the throne for 70 years and you don't get the atmosphere that you get here at home when you're at home.
If you would just talk to me about the atmosphere and the solemnity that you're sensing at the moment.
It's actually quite subdued, very respectful. After all, we're all here for the same purpose, to say goodbye to our Queen.
And the emotion is clear to see. I can see that you are already touched.
Yeah, well, you can't help it. I mean, she's been such a great ambassador for this country for 70 years and she's gone, so, yeah.
How will you be feeling tomorrow, do you imagine, when the funeral commences?
Truthfully, incredibly sad, because it would be the last time we say goodbye to our Queen, Queen Elizabeth and the Elizabethan age, and yeah, quite emotional, to be honest.
Robbie, you've flown from Toronto, Canada. Why is it important for you to be here?
Well, she was my queen, and I just had to be here for her.
Well, just a sense of the sentiment that people feel here, and no doubt many across the country and even the world will be able to share with what's just been said, Rita.
Ashley, thank you very much. Ashley John Baptiste reporting there. Time for a look at the weather now. Here is Ben Rich. Ben.
Hi Rita, thank you. Good evening. There have been some sunny spells today, but generally speaking, it has been a somewhat cloudier day, and I think we're going to stick with that slightly cloudier theme as we head into tomorrow. The satellite picture shows a stripe of cloud that has been bringing some spots of rain in places. And then out to the west, we've got a very weak frontal system, and that will thicken up the cloud for some of us into tomorrow, may even bring the odd spot of rain. But in London and in Windsor, for the commemorations tomorrow, it should stay just about dry. I can't completely rule out the odd spot of rain late in the day. But back to the here and now, quite a lot of cloud around out there, producing some showers here and there. Best of the clear spells overnight across parts of South Wales, southwest England. That could allow some mist patches to form. Probably not as cold as it was last night in the southwest of England. It will be cold in the northeast of Scotland, a touch of frost for some. But here we'll start tomorrow with some sunshine. Also some sunshine across southwest England, parts of Wales, Northern Ireland, perhaps brightening up a little as well. But for many, we are going to see this band of cloud working slowly eastwards with a few spots of rain. Southwest Scotland, northwest England, maybe down into the Midlands, and yes, possibly some spots of rain close to the London area late in the afternoon. 13 to 19 degrees, the temperatures, and then that thicker cloud with the odd spot of drizzle continuing to work eastwards through the evening. But for most, it is going to be a dry day. As the week wears on, this area of high pressure that's been with us for a little while relinquishes its grip, allowing a frontal system to push in from the west. It'll be quite a slow feature. It'll take its time, but it does increase the likelihood that we'll see some outbreaks of rain through the second half of the week. But after a weekend that's been quite chilly by day and also by night, the temperatures are a little higher than they have been. But for tomorrow, dry for most, if rather cloudy. Rita.
Thank you, Ben. Well, that's all from us for now. I'll be back just after 10 this evening. There'll be full coverage of the UK National Moment of Silence here on BBC One at 8 p.m. In the meantime, it's time to join our colleagues across the nations and regions for the news where you are. Good night. Thank you for watching.